Hey, you guys, it's that girl Alana. Each week here is something new in my walk with Jesus. We'll chat about struggles, victories, and faith, and I'll bring some guests along the way to do the same. Let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome back to That Girl Alana. It's so great to see you all. Well, I guess I don't even see you, but it's so great to talk to you all. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who's been reaching out to me over the last few weeks for our first few episodes. This is episode 4, but specifically I've had a lot of people in my life just tell me what the podcasts have meant to them, how it's applied to them, what it's stirring in them. And I just want to, very, very much say thank you to those people who are expressing that. A podcast is hard. It's a lot of work, more work than I anticipated, which isn't a bad thing. Everything that's worthwhile in this world is uphill. All that to say, I know I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I know that this is what God has for me to do, but it is a lot. It's a lot on our family. My husband is the video editor for these videos. If you're watching on YouTube, he is the one that does those for us and does our reels and things. So he is in this just as much as I am, and our family is committed to this podcast. So all that to say, it takes a lot of effort, and when you tell me like the things that has encouraged you or just what you're getting from the podcast, it just makes it that much more easy to come into this every week and to prepare material and then to edit and do all the things that it takes in order to do this and do it well. We are committed to being better in every podcast. So if there are things and topics that you want to hear, please tell me, because I want to talk about those things. Whatever you guys are interested in, I want to talk about it. Truly, I'm pretty much an open book here in my life, and today you're going to really see how much of an open book I am, because we're talking all things pregnancy and labor. So this is not an episode probably that the guys are going to be super interested in, but potentially if you have a pregnant wife or you've had kids before and you can get a chuckle out of these things that have happened. Now looking back, this could be pretty entertaining. But all that to say, I'm very excited about today's episode. I'm feeling a little off. I don't know what it is. Just I think there's so much going on right now. I had mentioned in my last podcast, we have launched a new business, a new agency, really focusing in on social media management work for our clients, and that is just taking a lot of my willpower these days, and so I'm a little drained, I think is really how I'm feeling right now. So typically I pray right before I get on the podcast, but I'm going to do that during our podcast here, and I would just ask, obviously this has already been recorded, but just please be in prayer with me as you hear this, and as much prayer as you can give this podcast, please, I will take it, and that is the only thing that really counts in terms of our efforts here. So let's do it. Oh man, dear God, you are the author of my life. You are my savior. You are all powerful, all knowing. You are good. I feel your purpose in this room every time that I record a podcast, every time that I talk to people about it after the fact. I feel what you're doing in my life. And I am just so humbled that I get to be a part of this, that I am chosen in this way. In this podcast, I pray that you would just draw people closer to you, that the result of the words that I say is not for people to know more about me, but for them to know more about you. I pray that you would give me those words, the words that would be impactful, that would soften people's hearts, that would open them up to thinking outside of the ways that they're currently thinking, in ways that help them to see you love them so, so much. And Lord, my most intimate moments with you almost ever in my life came during the hardest moments, which we'll talk about in this episode. So God, give that intimacy to other people, give that closeness to other people that are listening to this. I lift them up. I pray your kindness and your favor and your blessings on the people who are listening to this episode. In Jesus' name, amen. We've just been, the last few months, every night before we go to bed, our oldest daughter, she's almost 2, so we've been doing a more specific routine with her at night to be able to, pray with her every night before she goes to bed. And it's so cute because, now she says amen and she folds her hands and closes her eyes, and she always asks for one more prayer after we do our prayer. So every time I hear amen now, it's like this super sweet reminder of her little voice, which is just my favorite thing ever. And I think a perfect segue into our episode today. So pregnancy and labor. I am not the mom vibe person in terms of my online presence. There are so many women who are, they're just powerhouses, and they are just like made for motherhood, and it pours out of them and it pours into other people, and that is their gifting, and they are just equipped for that. And that is not who I am. I'm really confident in my ability to parent, and I think our daughters have really great parents, but like for that to be a brand or like a thing I plan to talk about in here a lot is not the case for me. I would love to be that person, of course, who doesn't want to be like, the cool mom who like does everything well and is so intimidating with her abilities, but that is not me. It never has been. In fact, when I was a little girl, I always had like dreams and fantasies of being a wife, but not being a mom. And not that I wasn't like, oh, I don't want to be a mom, but it just wasn't something that I was dreaming over. And so when I would get into serious relationships that were talking about marriage, I would start to think about, how would this logistically play out? What are you expecting of me? Like, do you desire a woman who's going to be a stay-at-home mom always? Are you open to someone who's working? Do you like what's the feels there, right? And there definitely were times in my life that I thought what I could be as a full-time stay-at-home mom. I have since learned that is not who God has created me to be. I've wrestled with that so much because I know that the best care for our children comes from their parents. And so I know that there is some sort of compromise in that process of letting somebody else watch your children instead of you always watching your children. But for us, it really just came down to who am I? Our life, if I was a stay-at-home mom, would have to be downsized, but that was something that we were both willing to do if that's who we felt like I was and what was the best decision for our family. But I know that in those times where I have attempted to be like the full-time stay-at-home mom and maybe try to embrace that part of me, that I got really restless. And there was also this urgency I felt. I didn't feel like being a mom was a waste of my life, but there was just additional things that I wanted to accomplish and do. And ultimately, I just didn't feel like it was who God made me to be. And so I really had to embrace that and let go of the whatever layers of of guilt and shame that there was tied up into all of those expectations, and all that to say, God has totally delivered my family from that. We feel really, really confident in the structure we have. We have an amazing nanny. Shout out to you, Hannah. She told me she listens to our podcast. So hey there, if you're listening. She is such a gift to us. And all that to say, I do still have a good balance with the girls. And every time that I'm with my girls, I'm able to show up that much more engaged and peaceful and intentional with the way that I want to parent, because I'm not trying to be this version of myself that I'm not. So that was a bit of an aside, but I will say, if you are somebody who's listening to this podcast and you are a business owner, or you have a career, or you are trying to do a side hustle, like you just have other things, especially related to an income perspective, then I just want to encourage you that God made you exactly who you are. There are realities that the children need their mother, your children need their father, but God also intentionally made you with the gifts and the talents, the dreams that you have on purpose. It's not an accident. It's not something that you have to push down and shove aside for the sake of being the exactly picture perfect traditional household. So all that to say, I support you in what is right for your family. I am not someone who will judge you for that. Let's get into it. I have decided, and I feel so good about this, that I want to have a theme verse for every podcast. We did that for the last one, and it really, I think, helped tied everything together, because that's what the Word of God does. It helps keep truth at the focus of everything that we talk about here. So our verse of the week, I guess you could say, is Psalm 139, 13 through 14, a classic one. For you created my inner being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. I love that last piece, that I know that full well, just to be known that you are so wonderfully made. You know, to read the verse is one thing, and to intellectually believe it is one thing, and then to have a knowing of it and a feeling and a belief in it is entirely different. And I love that we get that example here in Psalm. So, you know, I do want to say here, because I never had the dreams of wanting to be a mom, or at least it wasn't something that was my focus, I really had a lot of fear when I got married, and we were trying to get pregnant. And I just want to have a pause here and acknowledge this for anyone who might be in that phase, might be trying to get pregnant, or is struggling with fertility, and you're not the full mom type, but you still know that you want children. I just want you to feel seen. You know, if you are really struggling with really fully getting there and feeling ready to be a mom, and then struggling with getting pregnant, or just the whole process of it, it's that much harder when it's something that you're already emotionally getting comfortable with, and it's then a challenge to get there. And so I'm going to explain that in my story. That, I think, is a really huge part of my first chapter of motherhood, and it was incredibly difficult to navigate. So let's go ahead and get into the story. My husband and I got married in 2020. Not even a pandemic could stop us. We had a wedding that was supposed to be about 120 people and turned into 50 people, because that was the max that we could have at the wedding. And it was still a perfect day. It rained just a little bit, which was perfect for good luck, but not enough to ruin the photos. And it was just such an intimate, special day. My husband and I were just talking about this, because our anniversary is coming up on this Friday for number 4. And we were just laughing at all the tears that were happening during our ceremony, specifically from him. He was just the most he just had the most outpouring of love that you could have. Everyone felt it. Like, as soon as the music faded out, you could hear everyone in the room, like the little sniffles. And I actually just went to my sister-in-law's wedding too. That was just a couple months ago, and it was super similar. Like, you could hear everyone in the room sniffling, and oh man, it was so sweet. But our wedding was just the sweetest. I was 25 when we got married. My husband was 28, and so we wanted to start having kids like pretty soon after. We were thinking maybe a few months of just getting settled, and I was starting my first business at that time, so I was just a little bit busy, and we were just trying to figure it all out. You know, me moving into the house that he had bought when we were engaged, and we were just trying to navigate some things. So the intention was, okay, let's like get settled, have the dust settle, have the business feel not so chaotic, transitioning into that full time, and then we'll start trying. And that's what we did. That was our plan, and we stuck to it. For the record, I have never been on any kind of birth control. So like, and when I mean that, birth control as in like a pill or some, you know, like the stick they put in your arm, or just any of those. I have never taken any form of birth control. I've always been very weary of it, especially when I was a teenager. I just felt like, it just felt off to me. It felt too invasive. And, you know, I did that at the expense of, I had really painful periods. And still, you know, my doctors would always just, you know, want to get me on the pill as quickly as possible. And it was just something, I was like, this just does not feel right to me. It feels confusing that you're going to mess up my system so much, or interfere with it so much with this little chemical. And so I was afraid of it. And so my mentality going into getting pregnant is that I thought I would have a really, really easy time getting pregnant, because my understanding is that people who have been on birth control, and this holds true still from the research I've done, generally have a harder time getting pregnant. Not always, of course, that's not always the case, but statistically speaking, if you haven't been on the pill and you haven't had some sort of interference with your cycle in that way, or any kind of birth control, then it is easier to get pregnant typically. I did not know at the time that I have PCOS, and I've always had PCOS. The symptoms that show up in my life for that, oh man, there's like so many, but the biggest thing is that I have an irregular cycle, that those cycles are very intense and hard to deal with. They're pretty unpredictable. For that reason, predicting my cycle is a challenge. And so when we were trying to get pregnant, that was a huge, we couldn't really predict it. Some days my cycle would be 23, or some months my days would be 23 days of a cycle, some would be 35, some would be right at 28. It just really was all over the place. And you could have a general understanding, but if there's only like a couple day window where you have high chances of getting pregnant, we did not know what those couple days were. There's also other things like easy weight gain and insulin resistance, and really challenging weight loss comes a lot with PCOS. This was suspected back in the day when we were trying to get pregnant, but was just recently confirmed. Even though we've suspected it over the last few years for me, I've always had very, very high testosterone levels, which also can just really impact your emotions and like your quickness to get angry and your fuse, right? Like women are meant to have a certain normal level of testosterone, and when yours is really high, like generally you know your emotions are really impacted by that. My progesterone and estrogen levels were really low, and that's typical of PCOS. So testosterone high, progesterone, estrogen low, which is kind of the opposite recipe that you want in order to get pregnant. So because of that, we didn't get pregnant right away. And in fact, it was a couple years into our marriage that we had been trying, and I still was not yet pregnant. Greg and I had always talked about adoption and fostering as a potential option for our family. And that was a path that we had started to go down when it proved to be difficult for us to get pregnant. We first looked into adoption, and in New York State, because New York State is the worst, I do not like living here. That's a whole other podcast episode, but it is one of the most difficult states to adopt in, if not the most difficult. This was during COVID, and for whatever reason, I don't know why this was the case, if COVID had anything to do with it, but we reached out to nearly every adoption agency, or looked into nearly all of them outside of the ones in New York City, in New York State, and none of them were even accepting people on a waiting list. For whatever reason, there were so many families knocking at the door begging to adopt that you couldn't even wait to get on the list to potentially adopt. And so we thought that that was a really clear calling from God to just shift what we were thinking and go further into the fostering route. It's obviously much cheaper. We really didn't have a preference, so to speak. It's just that we were really eager to have forever children, and we know that that's not always the case with fostering. In a lot of cases it's not. The goal is to reunite with a family, which makes a lot of sense to me, and we support that obviously. And so we knew that the fostering route was not as much of a guarantee for a forever child in our home, and so that's why the adoption was the first route we went down. But we looked into fostering with our county. We were ready to do it, and we started the certification process to get approved and to start to have kiddos in our home. At that time is when I officially became pregnant with our first. Pregnancy came as a surprise. I had just finished that week intensive therapy. I had talked about this in my first episode briefly, but in November of that year, I did 6 days of like 10 hours of therapy. It's called an intensive. And, the couple years of therapy before were leading up basically to that week of all of these applied skills and just reinforcement, basically just all the things that your brain can take in when you're just in an environment like that. So it was all leading up to that moment, and coming out of that week, man, I felt exhausted and lighter, and my spirit and my soul felt that way too. Truly. And I think there was something physiological that happened in my body that week that allowed my body to be a safer space for a pregnancy. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful that I was not pregnant up until that point, because I've done so much research now in what can happen in terms of giving your emotions to your baby in the womb, and if we talk about generational curses or generational trauma, that's basically where it happens, is in the womb. So if you are someone, or your mother was someone, or your grandparents were people who really struggled with anxiety or depression, or just a variety of struggles, that is felt by the baby in the womb, and that is taken in a way that is unique to that experience. And so to be able to get pregnant for the first time after so much healing had happened, I'm just so grateful for that it did not happen before that point. And so it was November that I had that intensive therapy, and then that January is when I got pregnant. Simultaneously, what happened in January is that my husband and I decided to do the carnivore diet for 30 days. Not because I wanted to do any sort of extreme weight loss necessarily, but I was just feeling so ready, because I was just feeling so much clearer mentally to challenge myself and to be happy about it, for things like that, not to feel like a punishment. I just had a lot of weird little health issues too that I wanted to see if they were driven by the food that I was eating. So we're like, all right, January 30 days, we're going to do the carnivore diet. And we did, and it was awful. If you don't know what the carnivore diet is, you just eat meat. Like, you literally just eat meat. I did not want to eat meat for like years after. I did, because that's actually true. Like, I did want to eat meat at some points, but man, I just never had a craving for steak. We had so much steak. I never had a craving for things like that again. Oh, it was intense. But now what I know, having worked with my OB on related to my polycystic ovary syndrome, is that women who have that diagnosis typically do very well with a keto diet. And every time that they're struggling to get pregnant, her first recommendation, if they have PCOS, is to go on a keto diet, which carnivore is the most extreme form of keto. So the reason I went on carnivore was not because of pregnancy and trying to get pregnant. I still didn't know at this point I had PCOS. We thought that maybe I would never get pregnant, looking at my hormone levels. It was this whole thing. And we were kind of accepting that maybe we would just have a family of foster and adopted children. And we were sort of coming into that potential reality for us. And then, oh my gosh, you guys, when I found out I got pregnant, I was so afraid. Okay, here's the story. I was a couple days late with my period, but for me that really doesn't mean anything, because again, it was like all over the place, my cycle. And so I was like, maybe I'm pregnant, I don't know, probably not. And so I took a test, very quickly negative. Okay. And I had been taking tests like every month because I was just hopeful that maybe I was pregnant, but I never really believed that I was. So I was like, okay, not pregnant. A couple days later, still didn't have my period, feeling kind of weird. I was like, I'll take another one. Still not pregnant. And then the next night after that, my husband was playing video games with his friend. He like asked me, he's like, do you want to hang out tonight? Do you want to be by yourself? I was like, I'm actually really tired. I'm going to go to bed. So he went and played video games. And I was like, I'm just feeling so weird. I'm going to take it one more time. And in my brain, I was like, I know I'm crazy. Like, you shouldn't take another one. You already have so many tests saying that you're not pregnant, but I'm just going to. So I took it, and it was unintentionally, when you get, maybe you don't know, but if you get like a multi-pack of pregnancy tests, sometimes there's a few like pregnancy tests that are just the lines, and then there's like one or two of those really cool digital ones that'll say pregnant, not pregnant. I accidentally used the digital one. I didn't know that I did. So I was expecting like a line, a faded line, all those things that you look for. But I took the test and I flipped it over at the end of the 3 minutes or whatever, and it was just that word. It was just like pregnant. I was like, I truly could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe that I have 2 children, let alone 1. But at that moment, I can't explain what came over me other than complete fear. I started shaking like crazy because, again, in my brain, 1, I didn't think we were going to get pregnant anytime soon. 2, I just because I had closed that chapter in my brain, I just really wasn't ready for it all of a sudden. It's like I got ready and then it was really hard. So then I had to get ready all over again, and I had to get ready because here we go. I had also just come off of a very intensive week of therapy a couple months before where we just talked so deeply about the importance of parenthood. And so the role of me being a mother was that much more high stakes to me too. And so the role and what this meant and implied for the rest of my life meant so much more to me than I ever had. And I think I felt a lot of pressure in that moment as well of not knowing if I would be a good mom or not. And so poor Greg, he had just asked me if, I was cool with him playing video games, which I almost never say no. And so I come out of the bathroom with this pregnancy test and I start freaking out, like panicking and be like, you gotta get off video games right now, you have to get off. And he was like, what? Like, you literally just said I could 2 minutes ago. Like, why are you being crazy? And his friends, he's playing like with his friends, live, how they do. And he's like, guys, I gotta go. And he's like, he's so confused. He's like, what is happening? And so I sit down on the couch and I just threw it at him. I just threw the test because I didn't know what to do. I was in shock, and I'll never forget. He just takes the test and he's like, and he's in shock. We're both just sitting there in shock, like in silence. It's so funny too, because when we brought our oldest daughter home for the first time from the hospital, we just sat there in shock and looked at her in silence. And we got Chick-fil-A on the way home, and we were just sitting there eating it, looking at her in silence. We didn't even turn on the TV. Like, what do we do? I don't know. So it's just fitting that that is how our reaction was for the pregnancy. So we got pregnant. There we were, a couple years after trying, totally unexpected. God had blessed us with a little girly. Then the trouble began. Oh my gosh, you guys. My pregnancy was, especially with our first, was the hardest thing I think I've ever gone through. There's a couple other things that I can think of that are pretty trying, but I think of that year and I just like shudder. It was, I have never experienced sickness like that in my whole life. I have never felt more intense in every way. Sadness, excitement, stress, overwhelm, joy, anticipation, intimidation, pressure. Like, I felt all the things so deeply, as I'm sure many women who are pregnant do. Your hormones are just going up and down and kind of all over the place. So let's get into it. I get pregnant. I went to get a blood test because it was like the weekend. So, I went and got a blood test with my primary doctor. She confirmed I was pregnant. We were so excited. And then we went to the OB. We had scheduled an appointment. I didn't have an OB at the time, so just scheduled one with a random office. And they were the worst. They were truly like the worst. I felt very dismissed, and like they just really did not care about any of my questions at all. I had one appointment with them, well, 2. So I had my early ultrasound with them, and then I had another like appointment where I was telling him all about my progesterone levels, and I was looking at the blood work I got that they had done, and they were very, very low, and I was worried about miscarriage because I had so many hormone issues, and some friends of mine had experienced miscarriages, so it was just very much on my radar, and I thought that it was going to be a really high possibility for us. And so I was like, should I take progesterone to increase these? And he just was he's like, do you want it? And I was like, I don't know, like, should I want it? And he was like, I'll just write you a prescription if you want it. It was just so weird. He truly didn't care about me at all. And I took a progesterone pill thinking like this could only help. No, bad news for me, bad news. My body is just very sensitive to medicine. I take medicine and it's like even a supplement. Like, I could take vitamin B, I swear, and my body's like, whoa, what just entered our body? I took that pill, took it once. I was like, nope, not happening again. I won't get into the details because we don't have enough time for that, and I'm already rambling. But I quickly went to another OB, and then I didn't like them either. Then I went to my third OB that I ended up loving, which I'm so thankful for. And they're still my OB practice to today. So the symptoms that I had, oh, you guys, the nausea and the vomiting, like the sheer force in which vomit came out of my body was something like out of a movie. Like, I'd throw up in the toilet and then it would just be all over the shower curtain, all over the walls, all over the toilet, because it would ricochet out of the toilet because it was crazy. You guys, it was crazy. It was so intense that actually, sadly, in my first trimester, I lost 12 pounds. And they were actually quite concerned because, one, I need nutrients, but also I need even more nutrients than normal because I need to supply for this precious little human inside of me. And so they recommend, I'm a weary person, as you could tell, because I've never taken birth control and those things. I'm weary when it comes to medicine. I really believe that we are over medicated as a Western society, that we just are so quick to have medications, and I eliminate it as much as humanly possible in my system. There are definitely times where you should take it, and I do take medicine, but it is never my first solution to something medical. I was just so sick, and I was so sick for so long. It didn't last through my entire pregnancy, but it lasted through a lot. So definitely the first trimester, and I would say all of the second trimester too. It lessened its intensity, but by the third trimester, I was okay. I was okay. There were other things I was dealing with. So I've got this whole list right here because I put a list in my phone because I was like, one day we're going to forget all these things that I'm going through, and I need everyone, or I need me to remember just how intense this was, probably thinking, never get pregnant again. This is like the worst thing that has ever happened to you, and I don't think we can do it again. So all the issues I had, so the low progesterone levels, I got COVID in the second trimester, the nausea and the vomiting, obviously we just talked about. I got 3 different times, I got 3 different respiratory, just random illnesses. I had crazy sciatic nerve pain, which meant the nerves in like my pelvis region, I guess, they would like rub together, the bones would rub together because of all the relaxin in your body. And so there were moments where I couldn't stand up. There were moments where like, for instance, I'd clean the bathroom and that was just too much movement for my body, too much of like those bones hitting each other, that it was so painful that I could not stand up. And I would have to go on the floor and crawl around the house in order to move, like truly crawl. Then I had severe allergic reactions that showed up randomly in the third trimester. We now know what that is, but at the time we had no idea what it was. I was having hives, I would have an itchy throat and itchy tongue. It would be inflamed sometimes. I would have rosacea all over my face. It was just random allergy things all over. I had severe dehydration at a couple points because I was so sick all of those times. I could barely keep fluid down. Like, water would make me want to vomit. Water would make me want to throw up. And so I was super dehydrated. Had to go to the hospital one time because I was really dizzy, seeing spots all over, and they had to like get lots of fluids inside of me. I had scares of blood clots because I had really severe cramps in my legs, and they take that really seriously when you're in pregnancy because of all the extra blood and everything in your system. So many times they did ultrasounds and scans and all the things because they were convinced I had a blood clot, and just this extra fear running through me, and I didn't. Thank goodness. That I could not imagine. They were afraid of Blair, my oldest daughter. They were afraid of her weight. At one point they thought she was very, very underweight. So at week 30, they measure your belly. If you've never been pregnant, they measure your belly each week when you start to get further along, and it should line up pretty exactly with the number of weeks that you are, like for measuring 1 point to 1 point. So if you're 30 weeks pregnant, it should be 30, I think, centimeters. I don't really know, but it should be like 30 on 30, 31 on 30 on week 31. And so at week 30, I was good, I was 30, and then at week 33, I was still measuring 30. I hadn't grown anymore, and then that kept getting further. Like at week 35, I was like 31. So it was growing, but barely, and they were concerned. And so then I had to do a lot of monitoring and go in for nearly weekly ultrasounds. And then they're like, oh no, she's actually really overweight when they were doing the ultrasounds. Turns out she wasn't overweight because she was like 5.5 pounds when she was born. So that was like this whole thing. So it was just constant monitoring. When I was getting close to the end, my blood pressure was going up and down and up and down, and I was getting crazy migraines. So they thought I had preeclampsia, which if you know anything about pregnancy, preeclampsia is like the thing that you don't want to get because it could lead to death. It just like, and my liver levels were totally off. There's a lot of things that felt like and looked like preeclampsia, but I never got the actual diagnosis. For that reason, they forced an induction on me, which is never a path you want to go down. Induction happens all of the time in the United States. I'm so annoyed by it. There are so many movies and things you can watch and just talk about the money behind the medical system, and oh my gosh, I just like I cannot handle all of that. So I was induced, even though I put up a fight as long as possible, and they just basically were like, you absolutely have to. And in my case, there were some other things, but it felt like potentially the right choice for my situation given what was happening inside of me. And then there were some other things that happened during the delivery too. So I say all that to say pregnancy was so hard. Those were just the physical symptoms. And then there were the emotional symptoms, right? And I would say, for whatever reason, in my first trimester, before we knew the gender, because we found out the gender at like the 10-12 week mark as early as you could, I was having nightmares about the baby being a boy. And all of my life I have wanted boys more than I've wanted girls. And for some reason, as soon as I got pregnant, I was distraught, deeply, deeply sad, thinking that it could be a boy, which is so sad. Like I hate saying that out loud, because if we did have a boy, we would be just as blessed as we are today to have our 2 girls. It would have been amazing. But for whatever reason, I just couldn't emotionally cope with the idea of it. And so I would have nightmares about it. They were really graphic and really intense, and they would wake me up in the middle of the night. And again, I just think it was my hormones just kind of taking over. I don't know what it was, truly, because I don't feel that way. Whenever I'm not pregnant, I don't feel like I want a boy versus a girl more than one or the other. I know that both are an equal blessing. But all that to say, it really was something I was dealing with. And so I was just at the lowest of lows of my life, and I would take baths as much as possible. They're kind of weird about baths when you're pregnant, but it was like the one thing that I could do to try to have some sort of just relief from all of it. So I remember the most intimate moments with Jesus would come when I would take a bath, and I would just cry. And I basically had no words, but it was a time with Jesus. And I would just sit there and think, I can't keep going on. This has to be taken from me in some way. I can't get through this. This is too much for me. And up until that point in my life, I had never heard the voice of God in a way that other people would talk about. You know, I think there's a few different ways that people can hear from God, so to speak. And for me, God had always talked to me in just giving me a sense of a knowing. Right? So if I would pray about something and he would answer that prayer, it usually came in the form of I just felt peaceful and like I knew. And that's how God would give me direction, and that's how he would speak to me. But this was the first time I didn't hear an audible sound, but I started to have thoughts that were not my own, that I just knew instinctively were from Jesus, were from God. And I would just pray like, I have nothing left. Like, I'm so miserable. I can't do this. Like, please help me. And then I would also bring my fear, for whatever reason, of having a boy. And like, I don't understand this. I don't know what to do about it. And I remember that first thing he said to me that I knew was him. So that he said, I know the desire of your heart. And I would just hear it over and over again. I know the desire of your heart. I know the desire of your heart. And in turn, I know what's best for you. I know that this this baby is what's best for you. I know your desire right now to have a girl, and I know what's best for you. And it just felt like, even if it was going to be a boy, even if it was, I could hold on to that thought and know that God knew deeply what's the desire of my heart, and in that way, the boy, if it was to be a boy, would be the better answer for me and would be a deeper desire for me. And so I could just feel him so deeply honoring those desires and honoring and caring so much about what I desire, which, who are we, right? Like, the God of the universe caring about the fact if like I had a daughter versus a son and what makes sense for our family, why are we worthy of that? And I would hear that, and then I would just, once we found out it was a girl, I remember just feeling like I knew it, like, because I had those times in prayer, and because I got quiet, and because I got so desperate with God, I just, when they told us we had a girl, I was like, God told me. But even if we had a boy, it would feel the same way. It'd be like, God told me, because that would have been the desire of my heart, because he would know, because he is the God of the universe. What he then would also say to me, the transition just changed because I was still so deeply suffering in the pregnancy. He would say, I love you. And it was so simple, but I heard it so clearly, and I thought it and I felt it so clearly over and over again. It would always bring me to tears. I'd be sitting there in the bathtub wanting to barf my brains out, sobbing, and he would say, I love you. And all of a sudden, my grief and my helplessness turned from crying about my struggle into tears of joy and comfort and praising God. And I am so serious when I say that those are the most intimate moments I have ever had with God. And I don't love the fact that I had to go through all of that intensity in pregnancy in order to get to this point, to get to that point. But he is so true when he says, blessed are those who grieve or who mourn. I can't remember the exact word, for they will be comforted. I gotta look it up. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And that was me. I was mourning my life basically every day, even though I was so excited and so happy and so ready and wanting to be mom. I was in like a 10-month state of mourning. My second pregnancy, thankfully, a glimmer of hope for you all who are currently pregnant, or you want more children, or you've never been pregnant and you're afraid of the symptoms and all that might come with it. The second pregnancy was radically different. There definitely were issues and there definitely were things, but a lot of the symptoms that I felt in the first pregnancy had answers to them. So like those weird allergic symptoms that I had, we knew why it was happening, which, by the way, crazy side note, I'm essentially allergic to my body making breast milk. My body doesn't do a great job of doing that anyway in general, but in the third trimester when you're and this is when those allergy symptoms always appear for me, in the third trimester when your body's like starting to make colostrum and getting ready to make breast milk, those symptoms would appear. And then when I have the baby, those are when my symptoms intensify and don't go away. And because I was unable to breastfeed my girlies, those symptoms went away at the exact times where I would wean off and be completely done with breastfeeding, or my body trying to create breast milk, I should say. So that was just bizarre. That was weird. But that's my point, is that in the second pregnancy, all of those things weren't so scary and they weren't so overwhelming because I had already gone through them. Now, our girls are 16 months apart, so I think my body was really in the zone. I was 7 months postpartum, so we were in the zone of, I had just had another kid, and so the sickness was still there, the vomiting still happened, but it definitely wasn't as often or as frequent or as miserable as the first. And my gut says is that my body was not, it wasn't so new, right? It knew what was happening, and it wasn't so foreign, and it, for that reason, just didn't have as intense of a reaction. I don't know if that's true, but that's my theory. I did have somebody ask me, someone who's close to me, who knows my story and knows my story well and saw all the things that I went through, and she asked me if we want to have a third kid. And it's so funny because As soon as I was postpartum with our second girl, for those few weeks after, I was like, never again. I'm done tapping out. And now, exactly what they say, now that she's about 5 months old, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I do want another. My husband, he's such a good supporter, but he was like, no, we're not. Not biologically, at least. We're not making another one. So fostering and adoption is still something that we talk about often. It's still something that we explore. Our family has gone through phases where we thought we were going to move south, and that's still our potential plan before our daughter enters kindergarten. We want to move south and go into different school systems that are in New York. And so to adopt would be much easier to do, and even to foster would be much easier to do if we are not in New York. And so that's kind of what we're waiting for there, is to say, okay, are we definitely moving? And where we move, are we staying there? And then we'll start that process potentially. If we're going to do it, we would not do it in this state. I don't think, if everything is the way that it is right now with the process and the difficulty of getting through that, we would probably wait till we're in a different state. So that is that's the story in general. I know I have gone on quite a bit here, and this was really just about pregnancy. I think I'm gonna have to make a part 2 about the labor story. This was kind of a grim episode where I basically just complained about how hard pregnancy was the whole time, but my encouragement to you is that the hardest times in life is where Jesus shows up the most for you. The hardest, most challenging times is where Jesus comforts you the most. And I look back on those times in the bathtub where I'm sobbing. I'm like getting emotional about it right now, where I'm sobbing and I'm thinking about it. And I'm getting emotional not because of how hard it was, but because of how much I am grateful for the way that Jesus loved me and comforted me and was there for me and was so obviously there in that space, in that moment. And one day I'm going to get to heaven, and he's going to show me in my life all of the other moments that he was there for me, but I wasn't seeking him and I wasn't searching for him. And he's like, I was there with you. I was there with you right then, and you didn't see me and you didn't call out for me. But I saw him and I felt him in that moment because I was seeking him, because I knew that the only thing that could get me through was the power and the peace of Jesus Christ. And so that is a life lesson that I learned in that pregnancy, is, man, just the power of asking God to reveal himself, of asking Jesus to show up and to reveal himself so plainly in our everyday life. And I don't want that closeness with Jesus to be only in those moments that are really hard. I want that for life every day, and I want that for you, for your life every day. So my challenge to you, my encouragement is that he's there for you, and he's there with you right now in this room. My challenge to you is to pray every day, God, reveal yourself, show yourself to me. I know that he will honor that prayer as he did for me, as he continues to do for me when I continue to pray this prayer. It's probably the thing that I pray the most, because this world is really, really hard, and parenting is really hard, and pregnancy is really hard, and there's a lot of hard things in life. And the more that I ask God to reveal himself, the more that I ask Jesus to show up, the more he does. Or maybe the same amount he does, but the more that I see it, because I want to see it. I don't really have anything else here. I had such a loose structure for this podcast episode, but for whatever reason, I kept getting pulled to do this topic. So I'm hoping it encourages you. Please don't let it intimidate you with pregnancy, but I guess I'll end with this. If I were to go back and do it all over again for my 2 girls, I absolutely would. Would I do it a 3rd time? I don't know. But would I go back and do it for them all over again exactly how it was? I would. Absolutely. All right. That is our episode today. I'm praying for you all. Reach out and let me know what you want me to talk about in the future podcast episodes. I'll definitely do a part 2 on the labor process, because that's this whole thing. I love you guys. See you later. Bye. If you loved that episode, be sure to check out my website at alanathomas.com for courses and coaching. See you next week.